Hello, welcome to a small quick harvest addendum to my previous part of Ultros. I am here, pretty chill right now, to talk about my overall impressions of the game that I just played. I think I might do this with a lot of games that I play going forth. This is a small little addendum. It's not going to be too long. I don't want this video to go on for like 30 minutes where I just talk about Ultros. I'm going to feed my way through the good and the bad and my overall rating of this game. Since you don't know me, Lord Reverie, I like a lot of good Metroidvanias and I play a lot of them. Probably the most played genre I have done. If you make a Metroidvania, chances are I'm going to check it out to some capacity. And I found out about Ultros last year during the Game Awards, during E3, or the E3 alternative, and it looked a little weird, and I didn't love the art style, but after playing it, I do have some good news. So let's start with the good, shall we? So firstly, about that art style, it goes for this very psychedelic feel. The feeling of being on a lot of drugs. I don't know if the devs were smoking anything during this game, potentially. I mean, all reviews are going to be like that, like, oh, they're probably smoking something during this game. I think they just found a very interesting visual style, everything looking a little bit acidic, fluid, but also on contrast about growth and development, plants and nature. There is this kind of constant clash between the more biochemical nature of the world and also life. And I like that comparison, because going into the game you don't expect it to be that kind of distinction, but they go into that a little bit. Another thing, and this is probably my highest praise for this game, if I was going to put this high, I probably should have put it at the beginning, is the music. Whatever they did with the soundtrack in this, I absolutely loved. One of my favourite OSTs for any Metroidvania has always been Hollow Knight. Christopher Larkin put a lot of soul and love into a very atmospheric and subtle soundtrack, especially, well, when it gets to boss fights, it ended up being very bombastic and epic. But with Ultros, they went with a kind of Peru-style instrumentation. In fact, the composer himself even said he took inspiration from that. And this soundtrack was developed across 6 years, taking from live recordings as well. And I think that's awesome. Again, kind of leaning towards the kind of idea of growth and development, creation instead of destruction. But the soundtrack did its job and more, I think. There were certain parts in the game where it just was so immersive, it allowed some of the worst elements to just kind of go away, and I was distracted by how nice the music was. Especially, and we are going to be going into spoilers for this, I literally just fought the final boss, and the way they use the strings, it sounds like it's just so painful and loud and uncomfortable, and I love how they went about that. It was almost like a Silent Hill track in some ways. But yes, excellent soundtrack overall. I highly recommend checking it out. Even if you don't play the game, check out the soundtrack. It's wonderful. And then, kind of leading into that, the focus on gardening and life. So, as I mentioned before, there's a contrast between the biochemical destruction, use of fertilizers and biological waste and stuff. But there's also growth. There's a character in the game called Gardener, who's basically your friendly NPC in the game, and he's a lovely person. Nothing bad happens to him, don't worry. I'm glad actually nothing does bad happen to him. And he teaches you a lot about plants, growing different types to reach certain puzzles. And the idea of it is interesting. You'll notice that I talk about story execution and ideas and execution as two very different things in this, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But kind of the focus on growth and gardening is something I haven't really seen before in Metroidvanias, because they always are set in, post-apocalyptic worlds where bad things have already occurred. But there's never been an idea of maybe you can reclaim something, maybe you can bring something back to this world that was lost. And the idea of life and bringing back life is honestly beautiful. I watched the bonus ending, the pacifist ending, and it was wonderful to see. One of the best examples of this is you don't have to kill any creatures. You get meat from them, which is useful for fertilizers and stuff, but you can also feed them, and they reward you by giving you new growth spots for plants. I think that's wonderful. I love it. I wish there was more of that emphasis in the game, but we'll see there's a little bit more of that as we go along. But that's definitely my favourite part of it, that's the whole idea of gardening. Story execution. Now, this is a Metroidvania, and there isn't too much story to talk about outside of the fact that we are inside of this giant cradle, and Ultros is being delivered this demon that will cause the destruction of this place and also probably the entire universe. Well, not the universe, probably the galaxy potentially. And you meet this character called Qualia who's trying to prevent this. They will allow for the birth of Ultros, which will allow for a failsafe to be activated, which causes you to loop back. And this brings back into the roguelike elements. This game is technically a roguelike in some ways, and I'm glad they didn't say that on the Steam page, because if they did I wouldn't play it. I don't like roguelikes, I hate them in fact. Complete contrast to Metroidvanias, but I love Metroidvanias, I'll play as many as I can. Roguelikes, I stay the fuck away, because I don't like the whole loop you have to do with them, the gameplay loop. But going back to story for a second, I like how I execute the story. You can go to any area in any order as far as I know, and there were self-contained little narratives in each spot. You can find some lore, similar to Dark Souls or something like that. I like that. It wasn't too heavy-handed, and I like what it did with Qualia, Gardner, and some of the other characters. In fact, some of the earlier story directions was quite interesting. I like the fact that you had this companion at the beginning, this ghost, who I assumed was going to guide us throughout the entire game. No, Qualia just kills them in the second loop, and then they never come back. And I was like, oh fuck. It's a good way of building up tension, I think, and I enjoyed that a lot about it. But yeah, story execution was, I think, superb. On the same level as games like Hollow Knight. It didn't need too much, and it had just enough, I feel like, to carry it along. So yeah, roguelike elements. So yes, you loop back to the beginning of the game, but you don't lose everything. You keep map progress, you keep map progress, I think. You lose all of your items and your key items, these tools you get across the game, but there are items you can find in chests that allow you to keep these things. It goes over to the skill tree. So there is a skill tree in this game that gives you new abilities, and this resets whenever you loop. And that might sound on the surface level like a pain in the ass to constantly have to do, because you're going to be looping a lot in this game. I think there's 7 in total loops, so you're going to have to be doing that a lot. But they do add a little feature in, the little item you can find across the world that allows you to lock in certain abilities that stay there even after you loop. Stuff like a double jump, or not double jump, a higher jump, stuff like a wall jump or more damage, more health. You can keep them so you don't have to worry about having to grind for food to get more stuff for them. I like that. Good game design, good roguelike design, and it incentivizes you going to find exploration. I like that a lot. And then this kind of brings on to the next thing, and as I mentioned before, each area is unique, and I find that really fun. Hard thing in Metroidvania is making areas feel distinct, especially if they look similar. And I was worried that was going to be the case in Ultros because of how visually noisy the game is. I was worried that would be the same for a lot of it. But luckily, they were smart and made each area have a different sort of colour palette. And even then, if they didn't, they had a whole different sort of structure to them. Like one was like a Colosseum game show-esque place, another was a hunting ground where you were taught the basics of combat, another was a kind of gardener tutorial on how to plant stuff and do seeds, another was a hunt for different people in this bath suite, so you have to kill them to be able to get to the Shazam at the end, and I loved it. I think that was a great way of doing it. It does lead to an issue, which we're going to get to in a minute, but it was great. And I realise we might be going for 30 minutes here because I've got a lot to talk about, apparently. Okay, so innovative gameplay ideas. So this game kind of brings up an argument when it comes to innovation and execution. The difference between them is you have the idea, cool, you want to create an awesome idea, but then you have to execute it well. This game has a bunch of awesome ideas. Firstly, how you kill monsters are the actual enemies, but how you kill them with your weapon. You will get better loot from it if you kill them better. Basically, if you kill them with a certain combo, or you alternate between your combos and kill them quickly, then you get perfect variety meats, which are better for stuff like compost and also eating to get health back. That's great. Wonderful. It's a cool idea. Growing seeds of different effects. As I mentioned before, the garden, you get different seeds that do different things. There's a seed that allows you to conduct the living network, which we'll get to in a minute. There are seeds that give you a little platform you can get on. There are seeds that hook into electrical outputs and stop them from doing bad things in the environment. There's a bunch of different types of seeds in this game, and it's a really interesting way of doing that. Which leads on to the living network. This, when I first saw it, my mind was blown, because I didn't actually think that this game would have a way of actually connecting the entire map, but no, it does. Living network is basically an electrical network made from bioorganics that you can connect across the entire map, and it gives you a variety of amazing benefits, such as the true ending. You have to do it to connect, basically where you hunt down the Chambazols and you kill them, use the living network to connect them all up, and that gives you access to the true ending. You also unlock warp. Your save points in this game, these little pods, only use them at first to sleep, save, and use the skill tree. Or, well, you look at the cortex for the skill tree. But with the living network, if you hook them up to that, it will allow you to warp between the ones that you've already hooked up, which allows for a lot of running about and making sure things are all up to date. And then there's tools. Certain tools in particular I enjoyed more than others. I like the digging tool. That was another mind-blowing moment where I realised they had mapped out an entire digging network for the entire game alongside the living network. That was really awesome. The scanning tool was interesting. I got it a little bit late in my playthrough, admittedly, but I did like using it when I could. I liked the trimmer tool. That was fun. Just lawn mowing lots of weeds, very satisfying. And then the other one I liked was where you could like take parts of plants and put them on other plants, which allowed for some creative puzzles later on down the line. So a bunch of great ideas, a bunch of really interesting, innovative concepts for Metroidvania, stuff I've never seen before, which I love. I think they're fantastic ideas. However, this then leads on to my problems and the frustration that I had playing Ultros. The bad gameplay execution of the previously discussed. Execution in the worst possible way. These were not handled well, unfortunately. At least for me anyway, this is my opinion on how they were handled. Perfect variety killing felt very unreliable, I think would be the word. You could attack an enemy and use different combos, but you still wouldn't get perfect variety. Like, you can juggle certain flying enemies and they wouldn't give you the perfect variety unless you did a certain way of killing them, but even then sometimes that wasn't even accurate, so I wasn't really sure the best way of killing them. And also, perfect variety meals, while they are good, you never feel the necessity to use them because they're not massive upgrades. They're good for nutrients and leveling up, but they're not big enough for you to have to worry too much about that. It's pretty easy also to get the perfect variety kills. So I wish that maybe even in bosses, if you kill them in a certain way, you get like a special reward for killing them fast enough maybe. I don't know how they would do it, but it's interesting. Growing seeds with differing effects. So, yes, and I'm going to tie this to Living Network too. You need certain seeds to connect the Living Network. It doesn't just handhold you with this. You need to do, like, every single book the game, every single note in the book the game teaches you. The fact that if you feed enemies, they'll make certain tree spots which you can use. The fact that if you use certain tools, you can brush them along and allow for these connections to grow between them. Certain plants are going to be useful in other contexts. Now, in theory, that sounds like a really fun puzzle for one area, but doing that across the entire game is pushing it a little bit thin, I will say. And I don't mean that thin like the network's going to become thin, because you need certain seeds for certain areas, and you're not going to have them because you're going to have to scour the entire map for where you placed one seed before you even knew this was an entire thing. I think if they had introduced earlier, like even in the first loop, that there was going to be some form of network you would have to build with seeds, I feel like myself, I would have been more inclined to do this. but because of how much of a chore it is to connect these 7 up, it is just not worth it. It's not worth it. The pacifist ending is cool and all, but it's such a massive waste of time that you're not going to get a great lot out of it. But the warping, even the save point warp, I mentioned that was a cool idea before. The only reason you would need to warp is to connect the network up, but you've already connected it up to that point, so why would you ever need to go back? It makes no sense. There's no reason to come back to certain areas once you finish the network because you've already got everything there. So yeah, I don't know. And also, there's another thing that I didn't write in here. You will have to use the loops to allow some plants to grow. Get fertilizer in the game through digging, and you can use compost from putting enemy meat into the soil as well. However, you will require the loop for certain trees, and you're going to run out of compost, and that does mean there is a limited number of loops, so you can only do it after a certain amount of time. And yeah, that isn't great. That isn't great. Luckily, the ending you get from doing this stuff and not doing this stuff isn't a bad ending. In fact, it's an okay ending in my opinion. So, just if you don't want to do all of that, if you don't want the pain and suffering of doing this, I didn't do it. So yeah, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's an interesting idea, but I just don't think it's very well executed. Which moves on to our next thing. And combat and enemies are too simple. I'm not saying this like I'm trying to flex and be like, oh, I'm incredible at Metroidvanias, these enemies are too easy, get good. You're not going to have that much issue of them. Like, even bosses, you're going to be fine in them. I think the hardest boss in the game was the first boss. Qualia wasn't that bad. The final boss was easy. It wasn't even like Hollow Knight levels of difficulty. Again, that's coming off like a flex, but it isn't. I feel like if this game had better combat variety, the emphasis wasn't on combat. I do want to point out that that isn't the point of this game. It's about the seeds and growing and the network you're growing with it. But the fact that this game had boss fights feels like it went against that idea a little bit. I would have liked if they had used the tools in the boss fights. Maybe you could have found a pacifist solution to dealing with them that would have played into the game's strengths a little bit better. But as it goes, the enemies are not that bad at all to deal with. I think the most annoying ones were these Shamazors that you encountered in, that's the word, Shamazors you encountered in the pool area, where they'll just fly around and could hit you from miles away. That's it. Oh, there is one enemy I want to mention. Also in the bath area, which is probably my least favorite area in the whole game, there are these floating heads which can't damage and you can't really do anything about, and they block you from being able to get through certain areas. So imagine you're trying to get to a corridor and there's a guy in here, you jump past him, but then you need to get back into that corridor. You're going to have to reset the area because you're never going to be able to get past that guy, and this gets incredibly annoying later on in that pool area where they put multiple of these giant head enemies that just float around the room and you can't do anything about them. So yeah, that is enemies combat too simple in my opinion. I wish it was harder. Alien name confusion. So this leads on to, in itself, it isn't bad. It might just be my brain not being able to process the fact that they are using lore names for these items. But basically, when you're trying to work out what a seed does, and you want to use it in a certain point, it having an alien name and you having to memorize all the names for different types of seeds is not fun, because they do not, the name themselves do not describe what they do. They're not like tether or connection or bridge. They are just called their alien names, which creates a really annoying process where you're like, do I have Manishi? Do I have Cabdob? Or I don't know if it's called Cabdob. Do I have this one? And yeah, it adds on to a certain level. I wish there was a way you could like have like in brackets what it actually does next to it, because they do that in the lore description, but not enough in my opinion. It's more so you need to see what it does first kind of thing. But even then, you're not going to know what the seed's called unless you have a scan, which is another issue. Depending on what order you do the locations, you're going to have a much worse or much better time, because certain tools are going to be more useful in certain areas, including one of the worst tools in the game, the Fuster. The Fuster is not fun to use, mainly because it's a flying tool where you have to go into this orange liquid or any liquid to be able to fly up in the air and just fly around anywhere. But the way they designed it is there's a massive delay after you activate it, and I just don't know why they did that. it's it's so awful to control as well. I wish I could show you guys, because it's just, yeah, it's not fun. When you get the thruster, have fun with that, because it's just, yeah, it's just not good. And kind of leading on to one more thing, and this is because I hadn't fully explored this game. Incentive. One of the most important parts for me in a Metroidvania is incentive for going to find all the collectibles. Most of the time I will do that anyway because I'm invested in the story and the gameplay. But when it comes to Ultros, the living network aspect of it, where so much of it was locked behind this very intricate and annoying system, it just takes away the incentive, I think. Because it's all based around this one gimmick, and if you don't get the gimmick correct, well, that's it then. There was one cool thing that I like, but again, it's limited by the number of loops, is there's a door in one of the areas that you can only enter if you do not pick up the sword at the beginning of the loop. It's a pacifist room, you cannot get in there unless you have not killed any enemies. That's a cool idea, in concept. I didn't get there though, because the door to get there required a living network to get into it again, so there was no point going back there. It just, I feel like the living network kind of, not in some ways and in extreme ways, killed the investment aspect of the game for me. And it's sad, I know, but yeah, that's just the case. And that leads to the path to get a piece of ending. You have to connect all the Shamazors to the living network, which is a pain in the ass, to say the least. So yeah, I didn't do that. I just saw the ending online, and it's cool. It's beautiful. In fact, I love the additional ending you get. In fact, I love all the endings. They're wonderful, like really gorgeous cutscenes and stuff. And it sucks because there's so much in this game that is beautiful and is on par with Hollow Knight and other incredible Metroidvanias, in my opinion. Like, it doesn't do a whole lot of talking. The story involved in it is simple. But the music, the atmosphere, the beauty of it, it's wonderful to see. But then you've got the gameplay issues, like perfect vibe killing, having to choose a certain seed but not knowing its name because it has a weird alien name, the living network, certain tools that are annoying to use, the combat itself being way too simple, and no incentive for doing that, unfortunately. So overall, I will say that my enjoyment was severely undermined in the end part of the game. But at the beginning I loved it. I loved the looping. One of the few videos I actually quite like playing, and with that in mind, I think I'm pretty happy with giving it a 7.1 out of 10. I think that is above average. Definitely play it if you want to. I think I have issues with it, but you might not. You might have the patience to do all that, but I don't, so that is the case with that. But that is my review of Ultros, 7.1 out of 10. I liked it a lot. I'd not regret playing it. That's that, yeah. I hope you all enjoyed this video of my review for Ultros, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.